Keisha clutched her baby tighter as the woman in red pointed at her with disgust, demanding security remove the beggar who was ruining everyone's dining experience. Unaware that the restaurant's billionaire owner was watching from across the room, remembering his own nights of hunger and preparing to show his wealthy customers what true class actually looked like. Legrand embodied Chicago's dining elite. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables where deals worth millions were discussed over wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The restaurant's reputation had been built on Vincent Moreau's vision of culinary excellence paired with service that made every guest feel valued, though not all guests shared his inclusive philosophy. Keisha hesitated at the entrance, her worn coat and obvious exhaustion marking her as someone who didn't belong in spaces designed for Chicago's wealthy. At 24, she carried herself with the careful dignity of someone trying to maintain self-respect despite circumstances that had stripped away everything except her love for the baby sleeping in her arms. Now, before we continue, have you clicked the subscribe button? If you haven't, please do it now, and please don't forget to like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're listening from. Let's get back to the story. Excuse me, Keisha approached the maitre d' with nervous politeness. I was wondering if you might have any leftover food. My daughter and I haven't eaten today, and someone told me nice restaurants sometimes help people who are struggling. The maitre d' looked uncomfortable, caught between restaurant policy and human compassion, as other diners began noticing the disruption to their expensive evening. From table 12, Vincent Moreau observed the scene with sharp attention that came from recognizing desperation he'd once lived. At 42, his success had given him the understated confidence of someone who'd earned respect through achievement rather than inheritance, but seeing Keisha reminded him of nights when he'd made similar requests at restaurants whose owners had either helped or humiliated him. "Ma'am," the maitre d' said diplomatically, "we don't typically—" "How dare you bring that baby into a place like this?" interrupted Catherine Whitmore, rising from her prominent table with indignation that drew attention from across the dining room. "This is a respectable establishment, not a homeless shelter." Keisha felt heat rising in her cheeks as conversations stopped and wealthy diners turned to stare at the spectacle she'd inadvertently created. "I'm sorry," Keisha said quietly. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I just thought—" "You thought you could panhandle in front of people trying to enjoy their dinner," Catherine continued, her voice carrying across the restaurant with deliberate volume. "Some of us work hard for the money we spend here." The accusation that Keisha didn't work stung because it ignored months of 60-hour weeks at minimum wage that still couldn't cover rent increases and medical bills from Maya's premature birth. What would you do if you witnessed someone's desperation being met with cruelty rather than compassion? Sometimes the most revealing moments happen when people think their wealth entitles them to treat others as less than human. "Catherine," said her dinner companion nervously, "maybe we should just—" "No," Catherine declared, enjoying the audience for her moral outrage. "I'm tired of people who think society owes them something. If she can't afford food, she shouldn't have had a baby. Personal responsibility used to mean something in this country." Keisha felt tears threatening as other diners murmured agreement with Catherine's harsh assessment of her circumstances. The baby in her arms stirred, sensing her mother's distress. Vincent stood slowly, his movement commanding attention from across the dining room as he approached the confrontation with purposeful stride. "Is there a problem here?" Vincent asked, his tone carrying authority that made everyone present recognize someone whose opinion mattered in this establishment. Catherine turned toward him with obvious relief, assuming she'd found an ally. "Finally, someone with sense. This woman is disrupting everyone's dinner by begging for handouts. She needs to be removed immediately." "I see," Vincent replied neutrally, studying Keisha's face and seeing in her exhausted dignity the same expression he'd worn during his own desperate years. "And what exactly is she asking for?" "Food," Catherine said with disgusted emphasis. "Free food, like this is some kind of charity kitchen." Vincent nodded, processing information while Keisha watched with growing dread that another wealthy person was about to join the chorus demanding her removal. "Ma'am," Vincent said, addressing Keisha directly. "What's your name?" "Keisha," she replied quietly, unsure whether his attention would help or hurt her situation. "Keisha, when did you last eat?" Vincent asked with genuine concern, rather than judgmental interrogation. "Yesterday," Keisha admitted, her honesty carrying more weight than defensive excuses would have managed. Vincent felt familiar anger building, as he recognized the kind of hunger he remembered from his own teenage years in foster care. "And your baby?" "She's breastfeeding," Keisha said, "but I need to eat to produce milk for her." The practical explanation of maternal nutrition silenced several diners who hadn't considered that refusing food to a nursing mother meant denying nourishment to an innocent child. "Vincent, surely you're not going to encourage this behavior," Catherine said, recognizing him as someone whose opinion carried weight, but not understanding his personal connection to Keisha's situation. "Actually, Catherine," Vincent replied with quiet authority, "I'm going to do exactly that." He turned to the maître d'. "Please, seat Ms. Keisha at table 1 and bring her anything she'd like from our menu. Full service, complete meal, whatever she and her daughter need." The announcement stunned the dining room into silence, as Chicago's most exclusive restaurant's owner publicly chose to help rather than remove someone his wealthy customers had deemed unworthy of compassion. "Furthermore," Vincent continued, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent restaurant, "anyone who has a problem with feeding a hungry mother and child is welcome to leave. We'll be happy to validate their parking." As Vincent's declaration established new rules for who was welcome in his restaurant and why, Keisha realized she was witnessing something rare, someone with power choosing to use it in service of compassion rather than comfort, and challenging others to examine whether their wealth had made them more human or less. Catherine's face flushed crimson as she realized Vincent wasn't simply contradicting her, he was humiliating her in front of Chicago's dining elite. "Vincent, you can't be serious. This is Le Grand, not a soup kitchen." "You're absolutely right," Vincent replied, his tone remaining measured while his message carried steel. "This is Le Grand, where we treat every human being with dignity regardless of their current circumstances." The maître d' hesitated, caught between conflicting authorities, until Vincent's sharp look made clear whose restaurant this actually was. Within minutes, Keisha found herself seated at the establishment's premier table, while whispers rippled through the dining room. "Sir, I don't need the best table," Keisha said quietly, overwhelmed by a tension that felt both generous and uncomfortable. "Anything would be more than enough." "The best table is exactly what you deserve," Vincent replied, his conviction surprising everyone within earshot. "And I insist you order whatever appeals to you, for both you and your daughter's nutrition." Catherine remained standing, her social authority challenged in ways she'd never experienced. "This is ridiculous. Vincent, your other customers are paying premium prices for an exclusive experience. We shouldn't have to dine next to panhandlers." "Then don't," Vincent said simply, gesturing toward the exit. "The choice is entirely yours." The ultimatum forced Catherine to choose between her principles and her pride, while other diners watched to see which direction Chicago's social winds were blowing. "I've been coming to this restaurant for 10 years, Catherine protested, playing her final card of customer loyalty. "And I've been homeless," Vincent replied, his admission shocking the dining room into complete silence. "I've stood outside restaurants like this one, hungry and desperate, hoping someone would show the basic human decency you seem incapable of demonstrating." The revelation hit like lightning. Vincent Moreau, whose culinary empire was worth hundreds of millions, had experienced exactly what Keisha was experiencing now. What happens when someone who's achieved ultimate success reveals they came from the circumstances that others use to justify their cruelty? Sometimes the most powerful weapon against prejudice is truth that exposes shared humanity beneath surface differences. "That's impossible," Catherine stammered, her worldview cracking as she processed that someone she'd respected had once been exactly the kind of person she'd just demanded be removed. "I aged out of foster care at 18, with no family, no money, and no place to live," Vincent continued, his story captivating every person in the restaurant. "I spent 3 months sleeping in shelters and under bridges, asking restaurants for leftover food. because pride doesn't fill an empty stomach. Keisha stared at Vincent with new understanding, recognizing in his expensive suit and confident bearing someone who'd traveled the same desperate path she was currently walking. "The difference between Keisha and me," Vincent said, his voice carrying across the silent dining room, "isn't character or work ethic or personal responsibility. It's luck, timing, and the kindness of strangers who chose to help instead of humiliate." He turned to address the entire restaurant. 24 years ago, I was thrown out of a restaurant very much like this one by customers, very much like some of you. But I was also helped by restaurant owners who understood that feeding hungry people was more important than protecting wealthy people from uncomfortable reminders of poverty. The story transformed Keisha from intrusive beggar into someone whose circumstances could happen to anyone, while positioning Vincent as someone whose success had been shaped by experiences his customers had never considered. "Vincent," said Robert Henderson, a regular customer whose tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than judgment, "what happened after the restaurants that helped you?" "One owner didn't just feed me. He offered me a job washing dishes," Vincent replied, his gratitude still evident after decades of success. "That job became line cook, then sous chef, then head chef, then restaurant manager, then owner. Every restaurant in my empire exists because someone chose compassion over convenience when I needed help most." The transformation of Vincent's narrative from business success story to redemption arc changed how everyone in the restaurant viewed both him and Keisha. "Ma'am," Vincent said, returning his attention to Keisha, "I'd like to offer you more than dinner. If you're interested, I have positions available in my restaurants, entry level, but with benefits, advancement opportunities, and flexible scheduling for parents." Keisha felt tears threatening as she realized the evening that had begun with humiliation was becoming an opportunity that could transform her and Maya's entire future. "I don't have recent work experience," Keisha admitted. "I was laid off 6 months ago when my employer downsized." "Experience can be learned," Vincent replied. "Character can't be taught. Anyone willing to swallow their pride to ensure their child is fed has demonstrated the kind of character I want in my organization." Catherine stood frozen, recognizing that her attempt to exclude Keisha had backfired spectacularly by revealing Vincent's personal connection to homelessness and his commitment to helping people in similar circumstances. "This is all very touching," Catherine said with desperate defensiveness. "But charity cases don't belong in fine dining establishments." "You're right again," Vincent agreed, his tone carrying dangerous quiet. "Charity cases don't belong here, but customers do, regardless of how they're currently dressed or what they can currently afford." He gestured toward Keisha. "This woman will be welcome in any of my restaurants, any time, whether she's dining as my employee, my guest, or my customer. Anyone who has a problem with that policy is free to take their business elsewhere." As the confrontation reached its climax, every person in Legrand faced a choice about whether they'd side with compassion or cruelty, inclusion or exclusion, and whether witnessing someone's transformation would inspire their own growth or trigger their deepest prejudices about who deserved help and who deserved judgment. The question hanging over the elegant dining room was whether Vincent's public stand would cost him wealthy customers who preferred exclusivity over humanity, or whether his courage would attract people who understood that true class meant lifting others up rather than keeping them out. Catherine gathered her purse with theatrical indignation, clearly expecting other diners to join her exodus from a restaurant that had chosen helping the poor over protecting the wealthy from uncomfortable realities. "Robert, Patricia, surely you're not going to tolerate this," Catherine announced to her usual dining companions, assuming her social circle would rally against Vincent's decision to prioritize compassion over exclusivity. But instead of support, Catherine found herself isolated as other diners remained seated, their expressions ranging from thoughtful to ashamed, as Vincent's story forced them to reconsider their assumptions about poverty and worth. "Actually, Catherine," said Patricia Chambers, a philanthropist whose charitable donations had never required personal interaction with the people she helped, "I think Vincent's right. We've been sitting here judging this young mother without knowing anything about her circumstances." The defection of her closest ally left Catherine stunned, but her shock deepened when other prominent diners began voicing similar support for Vincent's position. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the Great Depression," added businessman Thomas Wright, "when successful families could lose everything overnight. She said kindness to strangers was the only insurance against finding yourself in their position someday." Keisha listened to wealthy people discussing her situation with growing discomfort, feeling simultaneously grateful for their support and objectified by their attention. The baby in her arms began fussing, sensing the tension in the room. "Vincent," Keisha said quietly, "could I speak with you privately? I don't want to be the center of this situation." Vincent recognized her discomfort and gestured toward a quiet corner of the restaurant where they could talk without performing for an audience of fascinated strangers. "I'm grateful for your help," Keisha began, "but I don't want charity that comes with this much drama. I just needed food, not to become the subject of everyone's social conscience experiment." Vincent heard the dignity in her words, understanding that being defended publicly had created its own form of humiliation. "You're absolutely right," Vincent said. "I got caught up in making a point and forgot that you're a person, not a symbol. I apologize for turning your need for help into a teaching moment for my customers." What happens when good intentions create unwanted attention that makes the person you're trying to help feel like a performance rather than a human being? Sometimes the most generous gestures require the most careful consideration of how they affect the people we claim to be helping. "I don't want to seem ungrateful," Keisha continued, "but having a room full of rich people debate whether I deserve food isn't exactly comfortable, even when they're on my side." Vincent felt ashamed as he realized his confrontation with Catherine had reduced Keisha to a prop in his morality play, rather than treating her as someone whose dignity mattered more than his need to educate prejudiced customers. "What would feel better?" Vincent asked. "How can I help in ways that respect your privacy and autonomy?" Before Keisha could answer, their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chicago police officers responding to a complaint about aggressive panhandling at an upscale restaurant. "We received a call about someone harassing customers for money," Officer Martinez announced as he surveyed the scene, taking in Vincent's expensive suit, Keisha's obvious poverty, and the dining room full of wealthy witnesses. Catherine smiled with vindictive satisfaction. "Officers, this woman has been disrupting our dinner, and the restaurant owner is encouraging her inappropriate behavior instead of maintaining proper standards." The accusation hung in the air as everyone present realized the confrontation had escalated beyond social disagreement into potential legal consequences for Keisha. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez addressed Keisha with professional neutrality, "are you soliciting money from restaurant patrons?" "She asked for leftover food," Vincent interjected before Keisha could respond. "As the owner of this establishment, I gave her permission to be here and provided her with a meal." Officer Martinez looked confused by a situation where the business owner was defending someone accused of panhandling rather than supporting the complaint against her. "Sir, if she has your permission to be here, there's no law being broken," Officer Martinez said. "But we received a complaint about aggressive behavior and disturbance of the peace." "The only aggressive behavior I've witnessed," Vincent replied firmly, "came from customers who attacked a hungry mother for asking for food. If anyone disturbed the peace, it was the people who turned a simple request for help into a public humiliation." Keisha watched this exchange with growing anxiety, realizing that Catherine's call to police could still result in consequences that would separate her from Maya, regardless of Vincent's support. "Officer, I have identification," Keisha said, pulling out her driver's license with hands that shook slightly. "I'm not homeless by choice. I was evicted last month when I couldn't make rent after losing my job." The explanation provided context that transformed Keisha from stereotypical panhandler into someone whose circumstances could happen to anyone facing economic hardship. "Ma'am, you're not in trouble," Officer Martinez assured her. "But in the future, it's better to contact social services or food banks rather than approaching private businesses." "That's exactly wrong," Vincent said sharply. "Private businesses, especially restaurants, should be the first place hungry people feel comfortable asking for help. Food is a human right, not a privilege reserved for people who can afford menu prices. The philosophical disagreement between restaurant owner and police officer created tension that could easily escalate into confrontation with legal consequences for everyone involved. "Vincent," Keisha said quietly, "please don't make this worse. I can't afford to have problems with the police when I'm trying to keep custody of my daughter." Her words hit Vincent like cold water, reminding him that his privileged position allowed him to challenge authority in ways that could be disastrous for someone whose vulnerability made any conflict with law enforcement potentially catastrophic. As the situation balanced on the edge between resolution and escalation, everyone present faced choices about whether they'd prioritize principles over people, ideology over individual welfare, and whether standing up for what's right was worth risking harm to the person they were supposedly trying to protect. The question now was whether Vincent could find ways to help Keisha that didn't endanger her further, or whether his public stand had created more problems than solutions for someone whose only crime was asking for food while poor. Officer Martinez studied the scene, recognizing that his decision would either diffuse or inflame a situation where wealthy diners, restaurant policy, and a mother's desperation had collided in unpredictable ways. "Mr. Moreau," Officer Martinez said, using Vincent's name with the respect reserved for prominent business figures, "I'm going to close this complaint as unfounded. No laws were broken, and you've made your position clear about welcoming this woman in your establishment." Catherine's face went scarlet as she realized her attempt to weaponize law enforcement against Keisha had backfired completely. "This is unacceptable. A business owner can't just ignore legitimate customer complaints about inappropriate behavior." "Actually, ma'am, he can," Officer Martinez replied with professional patience. "Business owners have the right to serve whomever they choose, as long as they're not discriminating against protected classes. Helping hungry people isn't illegal, it's admirable." As the officers prepared to leave, Vincent made a decision that would either cement his reputation as someone who backed up principles with actions or destroy his business by alienating the wealthy clientele who kept it profitable. "Officer Martinez, before you go, I'd like to make an announcement that everyone here needs to witness," Vincent said, his voice carrying across the now silent dining room. He stepped into the center of the restaurant, where every customer could see and hear him clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, what happened here tonight represents a choice between two different visions of what this restaurant should be," Vincent began, his tone carrying the gravity of someone making irreversible commitments. "Some of you believe fine dining should be an exclusive experience that shields wealthy customers from uncomfortable reminders of poverty and struggle. Others believe that great restaurants should reflect the best of human nature, hospitality, generosity, and recognition that everyone deserves dignity regardless of their current circumstances." Keisha held Maya closer, understanding that Vincent was about to stake his entire business on principles that could cost him everything he built. Immediately, Legrand will implement a policy that may disappoint customers who prefer exclusivity over humanity, Vincent continued. "Every evening, we will reserve 2 tables for people experiencing food insecurity. Anyone, homeless individuals, struggling families, seniors on fixed incomes, will be welcome to request a meal with the same service and respect we provide to our paying customers." What happens when someone risks everything they've built to prove that their values matter more than their profits? Sometimes the most important business decisions aren't about money. They're about the kind of world you want to create with the power you've earned. The announcement stunned the dining room as customers processed the implications of dining alongside people they'd previously considered beneath their social class. "Furthermore," Vincent added, 20% of our profits will fund job training and placement services for people transitioning out of homelessness. This restaurant exists because strangers helped me when I had nothing. Now it's going to help others the same way." Catherine stood in disbelief as she watched Vincent transform his business model from exclusive fine dining into social enterprise that would bring exactly the kind of people she'd tried to exclude directly into her social space. "Vincent, you're destroying everything you've built," Catherine said desperately. "Your investors will never support this. Your customers will go elsewhere. You're sacrificing a successful business for publicity stunts." My investors include myself and people who share my values, Vincent replied calmly. Customers who can't tolerate dining with hungry people they're helping to feed aren't the customers I want to serve. He turned to address Keisha directly. As for you, the job offer stands whenever you're ready. Entry-level position with full benefits, childcare assistance, and advancement opportunities based on performance rather than background. Keisha felt overwhelming gratitude mixed with concern for what Vincent's generosity might cost him. Sir, I don't want to be responsible for damaging your business. You're not responsible for other people's prejudices, Vincent said firmly. You're only responsible for taking care of your daughter and rebuilding your life. Let me worry about the business consequences of doing what's right. As Vincent's transformation of Le Grand from exclusive restaurant into inclusive community space became clear, customers faced immediate choices about whether they'd embrace his vision or seek dining experiences that didn't challenge their comfort zones. Robert, Patricia, Thomas, Catherine appealed to her social circle one final time. Surely you can see that Vincent's lost perspective. This isn't charity. It's virtue signaling that will destroy the restaurant's reputation. But instead of support, Catherine found herself increasingly isolated as other diners recognized the courage Vincent was demonstrating by risking financial loss to uphold principles that suddenly seemed more important than social exclusivity. Actually, Catherine, said Patricia Chambers, I think Vincent's found his perspective, and I'd like to make a reservation for tomorrow night. I want to see how this new policy works. The defection of her closest allies left Catherine with stark choices: accept Vincent's transformation of the restaurant she'd frequented for years, or find other dining establishments that would protect her from encounters with people whose circumstances challenged her assumptions about poverty and worth. As Vincent looked around the dining room, seeing a mixture of admiration, concern, and calculation on faces of customers who were processing whether his idealism would survive contact with economic reality, he understood that the next few months would determine whether principled business practices could thrive in markets that typically rewarded profit. The question hanging over Le Grand was whether Vincent's gamble would inspire other businesses to prioritize social responsibility over maximum profitability, or whether his idealism would cost him the success that had given him the platform to help others in the first place. 1 year later, Vincent stood in the expanded Le Grand dining room, watching as Chicago's mayor presented him with the city's inaugural Business Leadership in Social Justice Award before an audience that included food industry leaders, social workers, and former program participants who'd rebuilt their lives through the opportunities his restaurant provided. Vincent Moreau didn't just create a successful business, Mayor Rodriguez announced to the packed room. He demonstrated that profit and compassion aren't competing values. They're complementary forces that create stronger communities and more sustainable enterprises. At Table 1, now permanently designated as the community table, Keisha sat with Maya, both wearing professional attire that reflected the transformation that had occurred since that desperate night when she'd asked for leftover food. As Le Grand's Director of Community Outreach, Keisha had helped over 300 people transition from food insecurity to stable employment, turning her personal experience of struggle into expertise that benefited others facing similar challenges. The Le Grand model has been implemented by 47 restaurants across 6 states, the mayor continued, proving that Vincent's vision wasn't just idealistic. It was practical business strategy that increased customer loyalty, employee satisfaction, and community support. The statistics told an extraordinary story. Despite, or perhaps because of, serving meals to people who couldn't pay, Le Grand's revenue had increased 38%. The restaurant had become Chicago's most sought-after dining destination, with reservation waiting lists extending months into the future as people sought to experience dining that made them feel part of something meaningful, rather than simply exclusive. What many people don't realize, Vincent said when called to accept his award, is that Keisha Williams taught me more about business in one evening than I'd learned in 20 years of restaurant management. He gestured toward Keisha with obvious pride. She showed me that true hospitality means creating spaces where everyone feels valued, regardless of their current circumstances. That lesson didn't just transform our social impact, it transformed our financial success. The business metrics were undeniable. Employee turnover had dropped to nearly zero as workers took pride in contributing to community welfare alongside culinary excellence. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs as diners appreciated dining experiences that fed both their bodies and their sense of social responsibility. More importantly, Vincent continued, our community program participants have achieved remarkable outcomes. 91% have maintained stable employment for over 6 months, 63% have moved into permanent housing, and 42% have been promoted within our restaurant group or started successful careers with other employers. Do you believe that businesses succeed most when they serve purposes beyond profit? Sometimes the most sustainable success comes from creating value that extends far beyond the bottom line. After the ceremony, Vincent and Keisha walked through the restaurant where the evening's dinner service included both paying customers and community program participants, the distinction invisible to casual observers who saw only excellent food being served with exceptional hospitality. Any regrets about that night? Vincent asked, referencing the confrontation that had changed both their lives. Only that I was too embarrassed to ask for help sooner, Keisha replied honestly. If I'd known there were people willing to offer opportunities instead of just charity, Maya and I might not have spent those months in the car. The comment reflected growth that extended beyond employment into understanding that seeking help required courage rather than indicating failure, and that some people's assistance came with respect and empowerment rather than pity and dependence. Vincent, Keisha continued, I wanted to tell you something I've never mentioned. That night, when Catherine called the police, I was terrified they'd take Maya away. Single homeless mothers lose custody of their children all the time. Vincent felt his breath catch as he realized how much more had been at stake than he'd understood at the time. Your decision to defend me didn't just save my dignity, Keisha said. It saved my family. Maya gets to grow up with her mother because you chose to stand up to people who saw us as problems instead of people. The conversation was interrupted by Maya, now 18 months old, and walking confidently through the restaurant she'd come to consider a second home. Vincent, Maya called out, her vocabulary having expanded to include the name of the man who'd become like family to both her and her mother. Vincent scooped up Maya with the natural ease of someone who'd become an integral part of her young life, understanding that his decision to help one desperate mother had given him the family connections his success had never provided. Keisha, there's something I want to discuss with you, Vincent said as Maya settled contentedly in his arms. I'm opening restaurants in Detroit and Milwaukee, and I want you to oversee community programming for the entire expansion. The promotion represented recognition that Keisha's understanding of poverty, combined with her business acumen developed through a year of program management, made her uniquely qualified to lead social initiatives that required both empathy and strategic thinking. That would mean relocating, Keisha observed. It would mean helping hundreds more families transition from crisis to stability, Vincent replied. And it would mean partnership in building something that proves businesses can thrive while prioritizing people over profit. As they discussed opportunities that would extend their collaboration into national restaurant management, both Vincent and Keisha understood that their relationship had evolved from rescue scenario into genuine partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and recognition that the most meaningful success came from lifting others up rather than climbing higher yourself. The woman who'd once begged for leftovers had become integral to business decisions worth millions of dollars. The billionaire who'd risked his reputation to defend her had discovered that his greatest achievement wasn't building a restaurant empire. It was proving that wealth without compassion was worthless, while compassion combined with resources could transform entire communities. Their story became Chicago legend, inspiring other business leaders to examine whether their success could serve purposes beyond personal enrichment, and proving that sometimes the most important business partnerships began with strangers who chose kindness over convenience when someone needed help. Maya would grow up understanding that success meant using whatever advantages you possessed to create opportunities for people who needed them, and that the most valuable relationships were built on people's character rather than their circumstances, lessons that would guide her own life toward service, that honored the courage her mother had shown by asking for help when pride wanted to suffer in silence instead. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Please don't forget to subscribe and click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one, and I will see you in the next one.